Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Matthew Regenie, CEO and founder of Prospect Future, a marketing operations agency dedicated to helping businesses grow. This is On the Reg, a podcast for entrepreneurs, business owners, marketers, and really anyone looking to enhance their digital productivity. Today, I'm joined by my brother, Jordan Regenie, so one of the original Regs, and he's with Peace, Love, Freedom, where he provides consulting on operations, geospatial, and a number of other things. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
I'm excited to be here. You know, we grew up a lot with a lot of banter. We honestly would have 3 to 5 hour debates with our dad back and forth. And now's a good time to really showcase the results of that labor, I think.
I wouldn't call it labor. It was more passion for me.
Yeah.
A lot of fun.
A labor of passion, labor of
That's
love.
true. That's
you know
true.
what I mean?
Yeah, that's right.
All right, cool. Well, this is going to be an awesome episode. We're going to talk about geospatial. We're going to talk about operations. We're going to talk about marketing. Everything under the sun, apparently. So we'll go ahead and dive right in. One of the things I wanted to cover first with you is you have a very diverse career, okay? You went to law school. You worked for a excavation company. You were a recruiter. You did, was it project management?
Yeah.
Program management?
Both.
Okay. And then now you're running your own consultancy. So tell me a little bit more, like, why did you have such diversity in your career path?
Because I like doing things that are fun. I don't know. I can go into detail, but that's really what it is at the core of it. I think growing up in New Mexico, it was always kind of strange. We had a ton of access to adventures and different things at our fingertips, right? Like we were probably one of the first people in our neighborhood, if not the whole school district, to have local access gaming network set up in our house where our friends would come over and we'd put 4 computers together and play, strategy games against each other. But I mean, getting into the career, this is something I struggle with, is telling my narrative, because it is, like you said, it's so winding. But at the end of the day, I really love solving a diverse set of problems and bringing to bear diverse experiences to solve new problems. So
yeah. So I mean, problem solving is like the intertwining theme throughout it all. I think another theme that I recognize is being in businesses where you can see the results directly. So like an excavation company, you did Colorado Conservation Corps a long time ago. You've worked with real estate companies, right? So a lot of that is very tangible, real world, physical entity, right? Was there anything like in particular that drew you to that? Great outdoors, maybe? Like why did you kind of have that set when typically I think of a lawyer as like, hey, they're just in this big office in this skyrise building in New York, right? Like that's a very different thing from those other things.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I was going with New Mexico, and I kind of got sidetracked with the technology, right?
Yeah.
Because I love the technology aspect of things. But really where it comes from is growing up in New Mexico, we spend so much time outside. And I love being outside, whether it's snowboarding or skiing or camping with nothing but a tarp and a backpack full of eggs and bacon and a pound of cheese, right? I really love being outside. And so when I graduated from undergraduate, most of my friends were going off to be financial analysts and working for the top 5 consulting firms in New York and across the country. And I chose to go into the Western Colorado wilderness and live in a tent for 4 days of the week and in a tiny little apartment, because I figured, hey, I'm young. I should go build things and experience stuff outside.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of been something that's led me is I definitely have like a long-term plan and a strategy to how I conduct myself. I kind of like doing things a little differently and doing things that I like. And I think if you are doing something that you like, you're going to be good at it, you're going to enjoy it, and you're going to have better results.
I think what's interesting is like it's such a change of pace from what you hear of like the baby boomer generation, where it's like they work at the same company for 40 years, they get their pension, like they live and die by that company, and like that was their life, right? And then our generation, millennials, like we're starting to break out of that narrative more. where, hey, like realistically, YOLO is one of the dumbest expressions ever on the internet, but it's a true expression. Like you only live once. That is not an expression to go out and jump off bridges and do stupid shit, but I think it is an expression to live your life, you know?
That's right.
And so, I mean, the fact that you were able to go out and just do such a diverse set of career experiences, like all of mine have been in marketing, you know, and like I haven't then had the ability to see like, maybe I would have loved accounting, probably not. Or maybe I would have loved like some of these other professions, and you got the chance to try all that out. You worked with your hands, you worked with your brain, you worked with people, right? Pretty sweet.
Yeah, it is pretty sweet. And I think an overarching theme I'd like to layer into this conversation is why. You know, why? And I think that's something that our generation is really starting to think about is why do we need to live that way? Why do we need to work for this company that pays us a pension, maybe, and maybe we'll get a 3% raise year over year? Like, what does it matter? What is it that we're actually here to do? And for me, my why, from a very young age, I really wanted to pay it forward. Like and the thing that sticks in my mind the most is Coronado Club swim team and the coaching staff that was there. They were so friendly and happy.
Yeah.
And they cared about us and they taught us like essential life skills, not just how to swim better and faster, but how to work with each other as a team, how to better yourself as an individual, how to conduct yourself and show up to things on time. Right. And so those role models early in life really set into my brain. I want to pay it forward by being a coach, being a leader, being a father, and helping people to do the things that they love to do better. And so that's kind of been my why is how can I help people do things better?
Does that always need to come from a coach or managerial perspective, or like, are there other ways you can influence people and pay it forward in your eyes?
Absolutely. Every interaction that you have with anybody throughout the day, you have an opportunity to pay it forward. Whether it's by making a joke or giving a smile or saying, "Hey, that's a really cool shirt you have on." Right? Like those little things add up. One of my favorite phenomenons is when you're in traffic and you just look over and someone's kind of grumpy and you smile at them and they smile back at you. You know, you don't it's such a small thing, but that small thing could change the whole trajectory of that person's life, right? Like they can go into the office and instead of yelling at their employees or being disgruntled at their boss, they can now be happy and ask their employees what they think about something. And that employee could give them a great idea and that could lead to the explosion of their business.
Yeah.
Right? Like you never know. So just conducting yourself in a way that is positive, which is difficult. Right? It's not always easy, but at least trying and recognizing that is something that I think is pretty important.
I don't think this needs to be gendered in any way, but it's interesting because like I remember back in college, I had some tough times. Everyone did. Like you're growing, your brain isn't developed yet.
Yeah, you're pretty much a moron.
I literally remember this one time where I was just going back to my apartment and this girl smiled at me, and I could literally remember it to this day. Because I think oftentimes we're so caught up in our own shit that like we don't get those experiences and we don't give those experiences, to your point. And so they are super memorable, and everyone, like you do see people driving around all the time where they're angry and it's like, why be like that? You know?
Yeah, it's interesting as I used to have this thing I would say is, you know, when you're stuck in traffic, you have two choices. You can get upset and angry, but that's not going to change the fact that you're stuck in traffic. Or you can turn your tunes up or listen to your podcast and be inspired, right? And that's something I actually lost sight of that a little bit in my late 20s. And when I was stuck in traffic, I would be really upset. But I think now I live my life on the road, and so traffic is kind of, you know, a part of things, and you can't be upset about traffic. It's just what it is. Now, are there things that we can do in order to alleviate traffic problems by engineering better cities and smart cities? Absolutely, for sure. And we should be moving towards that direction. But when you're in the moment, I think a lot of outcomes, the best outcomes in life, come from the decisions you make in the moment, not the things that you prepare for, not the strategies that you put together, but when the rubber hits the road, when you're in a tough spot, what are the decisions that you make, and are they positive ones?
I think context has a massive part of this. Like, we were blessed enough to be able to live in other countries for short periods of time. I went to school out of state in Los Angeles, and that context provides so much information when you're in a different situation. So, for instance, when I lived in Chile, it's like their middle class was the separation between the middle class and lower class was insane, like absolutely massive. And so you can see how blessed you are as an American when you go and live in a country like that, because you're like, wow, this is like, we do really have a lot of opportunity here. And in terms of college, LA traffic sucks. Everyone knows that. Drinks, if you're buying drinks at a bar, they're $22, $24 a drink. I mean, this was 10 years ago at this point. And it's like, you move in like Colorado, when I first moved here, you could get a cocktail for $10, or traffic. I mean, it's gotten way worse now, but like, it's not that bad. And I know I'm kind of rambling here, but the one of the bigger points I want to make is I commuted to work an hour to an hour and a half one way for 2 years, technically 3 if I include multiple jobs. And so that context of like, hey, if I'm waiting in traffic for like 20 minutes, like, it doesn't matter, because anything is better than what I was doing before. And even what I was doing before I enjoyed, because like you said, I listened to podcasts, I called friends, I called family, and you just got to find how to utilize the time that you're given in a way that's beneficial, happy.
Absolutely. And I think perspective is so important. It's everything, right? It is important to recognize the privileges that you have. And I think there's like this thing in society these days. It's like, oh, check your privilege. And it's been kind of weaponized, right? But privilege it's a great thing. And I'm so thankful for the privileges that we had growing up. We had both parents in our home. We had grandparents nearby that helped raise us in a very structured way that wasn't just filled with sugar and TV, but like, our grandfather taught us the value of hard work and dedication and studying and learning things and doing a good job that you can be proud of, right? And so that privilege, I'm so thankful for it, and I want to build upon that privilege for my kids, right? And so it's strange to me that privilege has become like this dirty word, whereas it should be, in my opinion, the thing that we seek after. We should seek after privilege, right? Because by having the privilege to have diverse experiences, to have mentors, to open up opportunities, like the world becomes your oyster. And don't get me wrong, like, I understand people have less privilege, and so how do we improve their access?
Yeah, but
right?
there's always a spectrum, and I think that is the American dream, is that there is a spectrum. Because if there isn't a spectrum, then we're in what would that be, a utopia? What is it in The Giver? Where
Could be a dystopia.
Yeah, dystopia. It's I mean, I don't want to say the word communist, but like, what's the word I'm looking for here?
I don't know, but I think if I'm feeling you right, it's how do we improve everyone's privilege instead of knocking on the people who have it, right? I don't know.
I don't want to get too much into that, because I think that's a whole another conversation. But I mean, it's interesting because your branding, peace, love, freedom. You have a phoenix, which I want to ask about that. But peace, love, freedom, to me, like, that's very American. Like,
yeah,
love, freedom, peace, very American, right? And again, comes down to the American dream. It's like, you can get whatever you want as long as you work hard enough and try hard enough and just go after it. And I think that's very true in most cases.
Well, and I know I'm pedantic to the nth degree, and so I'll modify what you said a little bit, because I think you're like almost 100% spot on. But I would change it to, you won't get what you want unless you're trying and putting the effort forward and putting in that work, right? Because sometimes things happen that are out of your control. And so no matter how hard you're working, circumstances arise that are just super unfortunate. and knock you off the stool, right? But if you don't get back up and keep going, you're not going to get to where you want to be, right? So the American dream, to your point, is, hey, if you want a better life, you can earn a better life. You just have to work for it. It doesn't mean it's going to happen, but if you don't work for it, it certainly won't happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think entitlement. That's the first word that comes to mind when you're talking about that, because it's like so many people feel entitled to privileges or entitled to success, and it's like, dude, there are so many other people that are willing to work for it. And don't get me wrong, you compare an American person versus a Chinese person, like we have so much more opportunity at our base level without having to try hard. And I think that creates a lot of that entitlement in the first place, is that we just don't, again, back to like context, it's like we just don't understand how much we already have. And if you get rid of that entitlement of like, I deserve this or I deserve that, and say, I'm going to grab this or I'm going to be happy. Like, I don't need to try to be happy in the future. I could be happy now.
That's right.
You know what I mean? It's why do we keep pushing for this thing that's down the road, or wanting all of these different parts of the equation to fall into place before we can have this thing, when we can just have it right now?
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing about modern society, is our need to have things right now. And I'm not sure that's a good thing.
I think we're talking about different things.
Oh,
I'm saying that people are saying, I'm not happy now. I'm not going to be happy until I have the house and the family and the savings and the vacations. And it's like, why? One, you don't know all these other people that you're looking at and being envious of. You don't know how they got that. Did they inherit it? Are they in massive amounts of debt? What? You have no idea. So why be unhappy with where you're at now? Be happy now. You can still have those goals and be potentially happier when you achieve those goals. But that's what I'm talking about in terms of that time frame of now and then, is if you're only focusing on what comes next instead of where you're at now, I think you're missing the point.
yeah, I completely agree. And I think the culture of immediate gratification, it seems to me that it is stripping our society of goal setting. And that's, I think, what you said is critically important, and it ties back to why. And I'm going to try to do this throughout the conversation, is why do you want that thing? Right. And after that, why, if that thing is your goal, how do you set up objectives that you can achieve along the way that help you reach that goal? Right? Because if you don't know the why, it's hard to set a goal. And if you don't set a goal, you're probably never going to attain it. It's not just going to happen. I mean, for some people it does, but by and large, probably not. And so if we're constantly inundated with immediate gratification, it becomes less, it seems less necessary to set goals and actually achieve things.
I agree and I disagree. During my graduation from college, every single speech, and I kid you not, every single one was on the same topic. Every single speech was, I hope that you fail. And it's this resounding like, oh my God, yes, that's amazing. Like, this is so profound, because without failure, without overcoming failure, you can't succeed. And you have to fail 100 times before you can succeed once. And you need to become strong enough to overcome this. I think that's absolute hogwash. I think with enough planning and preparation, you don't need to fail. I think you can succeed outright with enough planning, preparation, and yes, a little bit of luck. But this whole concept of you need to fail first, it's like, no, be smarter, be more prepared, surround yourself by the right people and the right team, systematize your process, have achievable goals. I think that's helpful too. Like, obviously, if my goal was, hey, I want to have 30 million in revenue by the end of this year, yeah, I would fail. I would fail that goal. But I just don't think that rhetoric by so many influencers and motivational speakers of you should fail before you should succeed, I don't believe in that.
Well, it's interesting. I went to your graduation, And it was the first time I'd ever heard Elon Musk speak in person.
Horrible
And it was
speaker.
the worst speech I've ever heard in my life. Seriously, like it was so bad. I was sitting there thinking, why did they put this guy in front of these people to give them a speech? Because it was so bad. But since then, I've become a little bit of a Musk fanboy, not necessarily like a sycophant, but definitely admire the man and his work and effort.
Sure. Yeah.
And the thing about failure is it's not that you should fail before you succeed. It's that you will fail before you succeed. No matter how much planning or effort you put into it, you're going to fail. And so I'm definitely an advocate of the lean startup methodology where, hey, we recognize we're going to fail. And I would rather do a little bit of work, get an MVP out the door that I think is going to work, put it in the hands of people who need it, see where the fail points are, and then go back to the drawing board and keep going so that I can spend as little resources as possible on each iteration to get to something that is actually going to be useful and successful, rather than spending all of my resources up front on the planning and strategizing stage only to get it to market and have it fail because it doesn't meet the requirements of people who are actually going to use it, right? And so you could either fail early and work failure into your process so that you're continually iterating and moving towards that successful product or service, or like you said, and they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, but you could spend more resources up front to put something out that's a little more thoughtful and functional and risk a larger failure down the road that's more catastrophic.
I still disagree. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it could be semantics and framing. My framing of what failure is could be very different from someone else's, and I think that's important. But again, this goes back to what we were talking about before about being happy. I could get there's that crazy analogy of the Chinese guy and his kid, and the kid goes off to war, and I don't want to get into it, but basically the whole analogy is like, something bad happens, does that make you unhappy? Something good happens, does that make you happy? And it's like, that's not what emotional control is. Once you become an adult and you develop emotional control, you get to dictate when you're happy. You get to dictate when you're unhappy. And I understand there's obviously outliers with medical conditions and brain chemistry and stuff like that. I get that. But on the whole, you get to decide when you're happy. So why not get to decide when you're successful? Why not get to decide what's a failure or not? Hey, this didn't go as planned. That doesn't mean it's a failure.
I think that's super fair. I do. And I think where that theory comes under stress is when you are responsible to other people, right? Is when you're a solopreneur, that is absolutely true. Or even just if you're just living your life if you're just living your life.
Yeah.
But I don't know, something happens when, I have two small kids, you know this. And so my failure tolerance, once my first was born, was dramatically reduced.
Yeah.
Right? And because I used to have this thought experiment where I would think, could I just pack up a bag and walk out into the forest and be happy? And for most of my life, that was true. I have pretty decent survival skills out there. I spent a lot of my time out in the woods. But now it's not just me. I can't just pack up a bag and leave unless I want to be some sort of degenerate, because I have a family that relies on me. And so when you have a family that relies on you, when you have employees that rely on you, when you have partners that rely on you, your failure tolerance goes down, which means your risk tolerance goes down. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't take risks. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't be happy in the moment and seek opportunity for success at every failure point. But it does mean that the mind control or the emotional control of saying, hey, you know what? We just went bankrupt, but I can still maintain my happiness because I'm alive. That becomes a little more difficult, right? Because it's not just your life that was impacted. It was all of your employees and your business partners that relied on you. So like I completely agree with you, but at the same time, I think your point of the spectrum is a good one, and that there are different points along that spectrum where it becomes practical or
Well,
less practical.
I think you're talking more about risk than you're talking about failure. And I think those are
Sure.
very different concepts. I think that if you have a strategy, you should be able to execute that strategy effectively if you're a good leader, if you're a good boss, if you're a good employee, whatever it might be. I think if you see opportunity and there's a risk reward equation as a part of that opportunity, then of course you might seek failure. I mean, I'm great at playing roulette at the casino. I win all the time.
You do. It's weird.
It's crazy how often I win that game. But do I sometimes lose money at the casino? Would I call that a failure? Absolutely. But that's because I know going into it, there's a risk reward ratio, right? So if it's, hey, company, we're going to take this big risk and it may or may not pay off for us. And if it pays off for us, it pays off for us huge. And if it doesn't pay off for us, that's going to hurt real bad. Yeah. I mean, that failure definitely hurts, but that's when you're talking about risk. And I think in a lot of circumstances, most circumstances, unless you're basically a startup in a brand new industry or pioneering something, that doesn't exist. Like me, I'm a marketing agency. There's not a lot of risk reward in a marketing agency. You can do things slightly different than other agencies. You can have a different structure, but there's a system for how this can work well for the agency and for the clients, right? Yeah, the risk reward is I can screw over a bunch of clients and take their money early on and hope that it doesn't bite me in the ass in terms of my reputation or my business later on. A lot of agencies do that. But I'm saying in terms of like the fundamental skill set and the fundamental path that an agency can take, again, there's always going to be outliers, but for the most part, it can be structured enough to where you shouldn't fail if you do your homework.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Is if you do your homework and you set up systems, your chances of success are much higher. And you still need to do the work. You still need to have the balance, right? And there's always trade-offs. So and you know this as an entrepreneur, right? Because going out on your own is incredibly risky. You could not make money. In fact, when I started my consulting practice, I had a few early clients that were pretty big. And then for a solid 8 months, I had nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's scary, right? That's a big risk. Was it a failure? No, I learned a ton. I learned how to select better clients. I learned what I need to do in order to move the needle forward on attracting clients. I learned a lot about what I really want to be doing, and I'm still learning that, right? But and I guess to your point, and I will concede, you're not a failure, or you don't fail until you give up something that you want to succeed at.
You don't fail till you're dead.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's limit based, right?
Sure.
If I set firm limits of I'm only going to work 5 hours a week and I expect to achieve X and I can't achieve X with 5 hours a week, I am a failure by that definition, but I also set a stupid limit on that success. And it's funny because I mean, there are plenty of books, 4 Hour Work Week. What's his name?
I don't know.
4 Hour Work Week guy. And and plenty other business leaders and entrepreneurs that say like, hey, like you really don't, you don't need to be working 40 hours a week. You need to be delegating. You need to be building your team. You can launch way quicker. You can take way more risks early on. But the thing is that to me, this business only fails if I place limits on myself. Because if I lost all my clients today and my lead generation strategies today don't work, the only limit that I place on myself now is I don't work on weekends and I try and work around 40 hours a week. Guess what? I wipe away those limits and the sky's the limit.
Yeah. I
could just work harder.
Trade-off.
I can go to in-person. I don't go to in-person events. I could do more networking. I can spam Reddit. There's a million things that I could do that I'm not doing now that can improve my likelihood for being more successful. But I've placed limits on doing those things because I don't want to do those things. Does that mean that if my business fails off of my current structure and my current limits, that I'm a failure? No, it just means I need to change my limits.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. And it's trade-offs, right? And it gets back to the why. You don't have this marketing agency so that you can spend your life being a marketing expert. You have this marketing agency to hopefully grow, help people, and live the lifestyle that you want to live.
Yeah.
Right. And so you've set these limits to working 40 hours a week. So you have a reasonable work-life balance. You don't work on the weekends so that you can enjoy the weekend. Right. And myself, I set limits so I can spend mornings and evenings with my family, that I can travel around the country. And so is my earning potential limited by that? To a certain degree it is. But I do think that earning isn't necessarily linear.
I agree with that.
And if you look at some of the most successful entrepreneurs, like obviously there's a ton that just struck gold early. But a lot of wealth doesn't materialize until later in life, when you really hit your stride, right? And so I think, what are the trade-offs that you're willing to make now in order to achieve your goals? And what goals do you have, not just professionally, but also personally? And it's important to balance those, I think. I mean, some people, they just have professional goals and that's all they do. And that's fine. That's not what I was put on this earth to do.
Yeah.
You know?
And honestly, like, there was a point in my career where I bragged to people about working 8 hours a week.
Yeah.
And then I realized that is the dumbest thing you could do, because you're wasting precious time. And I think you are deferring enjoyment and you're deferring living your life until some other date that may or may not exist. And I think that's terrifying.
Sure, but some people enjoy that. To some people, that is what they like.
Sure.
That is their purpose.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the most fascinating thing to me about this place that we're in, that is Earth, this universe, whatever it is that there are so many people, and every single one of them is unique and has their own experiences and desires and mix of professional and personal and cultural passions. And if someone wants to work every hour of every day, more on them. Maybe they'll become a billionaire, and that's cool. They earned that. You know, if someone doesn't want to work at all and they just want to live in a tent on a street, like, I don't know if that's necessarily cool, but that's their choice, you know? And who am I to knock them on their choice? There are people who do that. They want to live that way.
Yeah.
Some people don't want to live that way, and they've ended up there by circumstance. But some people legitimately want to live that way, and that's fine. It's a spectrum, right? Me personally, I love solving problems, and I love engaging my brain. I love engaging my body to build things and to help people solve problems and build things. But at the end of the day, I love spending time with my family.
Yeah.
I love playing music. I love getting out into the wilderness and just being utterly alone with nothing but natural sounds around me, you know? But some people love just being in New York City and the hustle bustle, corner street bodega, you know?
Crazy. That one's wild to me.
That is wild to me, but there are people out there who might be listening to this who that's what they love.
Yeah.
And that's cool.
I want to get into some of the business part, because we've talked a lot of kind of like philosophy here, and we're pretty much right on topic in terms of a sequitur. Is that what I would use that phrase? I don't know.
Sure.
You've worked a lot of your career developing, constructing, and managing the human element.
Mm-hmm.
What have you found to be some of the most successful factors in working with a team? And what have you found to be some of the most successful factors for businesses in terms of how they manage their team, their culture, their people?
Yeah. I think thinking of people as people is the first step. And as a business scales, it becomes difficult to do that. But it's essential to maintain that throughout your entire operation. And that's one thing that I've really strived for in every position that I've ever had. So I took a team at Microsoft. It was a vendor team responsible for global geospatial data acquisition. I took that team from 50 to fluctuating between 180 and at one point there was 400 people under our umbrella. And I made a deliberate point to know everyone's name so that I could walk around my office in the morning and greet everyone by their name, ask them how they're doing. How are your kids? How was your rec softball game last night? And build that relationship so that they're a person. And when people are treated as people, they're going to do better work for you. They're going to want to be there. They're going to talk to you. They're going to tell you what's wrong. They're going to tell you what's right and the ideas that they have to make things better. And so starting by treating people like people is the number one. And I think from there, it's the why, and I don't want to be annoying with this, but it is so important is why.
What are ways that organizations don't treat people as people?
Well, when you reach a certain scale, and this happened in our organization to a certain degree too. It's easy to chalk people up to your numbers.
Yeah.
This is how productive you are. This is how many days that you were on time. This is how many minutes you were late. This is how many people we need for this specific function. This is how much this particular person costs versus that particular person. And don't get me wrong, all of those things are important. They are. But tracking and analyzing numbers to understand your productivity and optimize your operations and allocate your resources effectively should not get in the way of treating people like people. Because, what I see a lot of, especially middle managers and upper leadership do, is they distance themselves from their team because they're worried that at some point they'll need to let that team go. And when you do that, you're setting yourself up for failure because your team isn't being treated like people. And you're already anticipating that inevitability of having to potentially fail and let people go, right? And so it makes it easier to let people go when they're just numbers, when they're just vendors or staff or whatever it is. And it's difficult when they're someone that you've built a relationship with over years. But you have to absorb that difficulty and face it head on.
I think what's hard is obviously there are flat organizations, but most organizations have a hierarchy, right?
You have to.
And in that hierarchy, culturally, like social culturally, I think the United States has very much made it like obvious that managers shouldn't go drinking with their team. Managers should be separate from their team so they can have impartiality. And I don't know if that's accurate. What's hard is I think a lot of teams, like you have different personality types, right? So one personality type might take advantage, whereas another one might not. So if you get really close with your team and you open up to your team, I think that creates sometimes an issue with the power structure, or the authority structure, where sometimes people, if they get too close, then they're like, oh, Jordan's my friend. I can get this to him in a couple days rather than tomorrow.
Yeah. And I see where you're coming from, but that's not an issue of developing relationship and treating people as people. That's an issue of not setting appropriate boundaries. And so if you are treating people like people and setting appropriate boundaries, that doesn't happen because you have to have boundaries and there are consequences.
Yeah.
Right. So as much as someone is someone you have a relationship with and think positively of, and maybe even be friends with, that it is your subordinate, at the end of the day, when you're in a business structure, there's work to be done and there are expectations on those functions. And if they're not meeting expectations, like regardless of whether they're your friend or not, you have to levy the consequences upon them. And that is why a lot of managers and upper leadership distance themselves, is because it's difficult to levy consequences on your friends, right? but it's something you have to do.
Yeah.
You have to, because otherwise you don't have boundaries, and then you don't have a functioning organization. So it's not that I'm the boss, I'm the leader, you do what I say, but it is, hey, we have expectations of you and your performance. And if you don't meet them, here are the consequences, and you will face them regardless of our relationship.
Yeah. Are there any systems you find that make that process easier?
I think regular check-ins. We ran quarterly reviews where employees would review their managers would review their employees, and there was always a personal conversation around how people were doing, what kind of performance they had, giving them feedback on how they can improve it, letting them know what their path towards advancement was, and rewarding them for great performance. And so having regular check-ins is the first step, but beyond that, it's every day, right? Are you talking to your team every day? It's your, as a manager, as a leader, I full-heartedly believe it is your job to talk to your team every day. It doesn't have to be long conversations, but you should check in, because so much happens in those little conversations. You get so much information on how they're doing, on their ideas, because when you have those small conversations, you build a rapport and comfortability that's important to a two-way street of information flow and feedback. And if you don't have that, then it comes to review time, and hey, you didn't meet your numbers, and if that happens again, we're gonna have to let you go. And they're like, well, it's the first time I'm hearing of it.
Yeah.
So you have it's that you have to have that regular system of check-in, of feedback. And it can be tough because a lot of organizations think we have a job to do, and you do have a job to do, right? You have to get the house built. You have to finish this sprint. You have to get this deliverable to publication, right? But at the same time, there are supporting systems that are required in order to facilitate sustainable production, right? And if you neglect those systems, when you're operating at scale, your production will suffer and your organization will suffer.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's good. Well, I mean, one of the things that I used to do a lot, and I think is super impactful, is those conversations need to be both ways.
Mm-hmm.
And it can't just be performance driven. I've worked with so many bosses where I hop on a call with them and and these are the crazy ones. They're like, hey, let's go get a beer. I've had clients that are like, hey, let's go get a beer. And we go get a beer and they just want to talk business. And I'm like, oh, I thought we were going to get a beer. I didn't realize that you were going to grill me on numbers, and that I should have memorized fact sheets for this social event, Yeah. But when you are doing this, I think it's, hey, here's how are you doing? One, obviously.
Yeah, how are you doing?
But what are some ideas you have?
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've had so many bosses in the past where they're just, hey, are you hitting your numbers? What's the game plan? Give me some updates on these things. They never ask people for ideas. And to me, that is so unbelievably dumb for organizational growth. It's like all of these people are in the trenches, and whether they have good ideas or not is beside the point. It's, are you asking them, hey, do you have good ideas? Because what if one of them is like, hey, I found out that we can be way more efficient if we do this way. Or I read this article the other day that the industry is completely shifting over here, and I think we should adjust by doing this. So many managers miss out because they're not asking simple questions of, what are your ideas?
Absolutely. And it goes even deeper than moving the company forward and becoming more productive or more profitable. Asking people what their ideas are, by doing that simple step, you avoid that quiet quitting, because you get people involved. Because, well, the critical step is you can't just ask your employees what their ideas are.
Yeah.
You have to implement them. I mean, some ideas are going to be good, some ideas are going to be bad. You don't have to implement all of them, but you have to demonstrate that you're willing not only to listen and ask for their ideas, but to put their ideas into practice and to let them prove out, or at least give them an opportunity to prove them out. Because if you don't give your employees a stake in improving and moving the company forward, they're not going to do that.
Yeah.
Especially if they don't stand to benefit. So like compensation structures are something that's at the top of my list of things that need to change in corporate America. Hourly structure just incentivizes people to take longer to do something. Salary structure incentivizes people to do the bare minimum to get that thing and not lose their job, right? And so when you have those structures and lacking input and very limited opportunity for upward mobility through the company, you get a whole class of employees that are just there to collect a paycheck and do the minimum possible in order to continue to do that, right? But by taking that first step of, hey, do you have ideas? Now this employee who was previously there just to collect the paycheck says, yeah, I got a bunch of ideas. And when you add, hey, you know what, this idea that you had, it was great. It made us more money. It made us more efficient. And we're going to reward you for that. Now, everyone in your company is looking at that guy and saying, whoa, that guy had an idea and he got rewarded. I have ideas.
Yeah.
I want to be rewarded. And now you have employees who are engaged, who stand to benefit not only personally from being validated and recognized, but also by advancing their career, by bringing good ideas to the table, because they have managers that will listen to them, implement them, and the company will succeed for it.
Yes. I think the one missing step that we haven't discussed is empowerment and ownership.
Mm-hmm.
Because what's the expression? Ideas are worth something. I don't know. You can have a million ideas.
Something about shit in your hand, I think.
There's anyone can have ideas. Some people are just idea people, but if you don't ever work off of your ideas or execute on your ideas, they're worthless, realistically. And so if someone brings a good idea to you, it should not be your responsibility to execute that idea.
No.
It can be. But the thing is, if someone's idea is, hey, we should do this thing, and they're giving you more work, then that's not the best idea.
No.
But if it's, hey, I have this idea, I'm going to go and take care of it. Here are the things we should do. Or I mapped out this super easy step-by-step process that you can follow. That's not going to take a lot of your time. I solved all of the problems for you, answered all the questions for you. That's awesome. I think one of the things that I, just reflecting on my leadership so far in my business, that I failed to do was, one, recognize work that was getting done that I wasn't paying super close attention to. And two, if once someone did prepare a strategy or prepare an idea, giving them the authority to execute.
That's right. Yeah. And that comes with risk, right? Because there's an opportunity cost for them devoting their time to this thing that might not work out. And taking time away from their core function. And so I understand that. And so the way a lot of companies do it is, they say, hey, you know what, you can prove that out, but on your own time, right? You can stay later or you can stay extra, whatever. But if that's the case, then you need to recognize after the fact. Like if it works, they need to be compensated.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's where I'm at is I completely agree with you. As good managers, make space for their team to solve the problems. Right. And the manager is just there to say, hey, you know what? This seems reasonable. Go for it. And the worst managers, and actually the reason I decided to start my own consulting agency or company, say, even when you bring them, hey, here's my process. Here's how I'm achieving 100% satisfaction rates and reducing the amount of time that it takes to work on a per unit basis by 75%. Here's the process and here are the results. I think we should probably try this out. And they say, no, that's not how we do things. Go back to doing what your job is.
Yeah.
How about no? I'll go and make money on my own and add value to people directly rather than having you as my gatekeeper.
Right? I mean, it's hard because there's like the whole military complex where it's like, hey, certain people at the top, like some items are on a need to know basis, right? So if we say this is the way we need to do things, and you're like, why? It's like, I can't tell you. Sometimes that's the case. I don't think those organizations are gonna end up being the most successful long term.
No. I think radical transparency within your organization is pretty important. I mean, there's some things that you want to keep under wraps until they're mature, but those are edge cases, right? I think if someone says, "Hey, this works. I've tested this at no risk to you, and I have shown that it produces reliable results that are better than what we're achieving with the current process," to say, no, we're not going to do that because that's not how we do things, and no further explanation. That is like the fastest way to demotivate an incredibly valuable employee.
I think a lot of it is laziness, and I think a lot of it too is, from what I've seen, highly bureaucratic organizations, managers, instead of doing work, attend meetings. And because so much of their time is taken up attending meetings and delegating, if something upsets that balance where they actually have to do some work or some reading or some homework, they're unlikely to want to do it.
I think that might be a contributing factor. I think it's even more at the core than that, and it comes down to incentives. I took a class at CU, spectrum management, and we had a guest speaker from the FCC. He was responsible for financial analysis at the FCC, and he said something that I will always remember, and it just sticks in my brain. Like really at the core, is that it's all about incentives. Everything. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are things that are impulse and that happen, but at the back behind those, there's still an incentive. And so middle managers or managers that don't listen to their team, it's because they don't have an incentive to listen to their team. It's because I think when you reach a certain level of bureaucracy and an organization that is so large, the incentive structure becomes very bizarre in that there's like this competition to advance, and it becomes a zero-sum game of advancement where if this person below me brings this idea and they get credit for it, they're more likely to leapfrog and advance before me.
Yeah.
Or I'm less likely. So it's because the incentive structure is imbalanced. So the middle manager doesn't stand to benefit from the good ideas of the employee. And to your point, the risk of taking a little extra effort or attention to enabling those things is not worth the benefit that they might get, right? And so they don't do it, and they actually push it down.
It seems like less about the incentive structure and more about the ethics structure.
Maybe.
This is what drives me crazy about the vast majority of organizations. I've worked with hundreds of businesses. I've worked within a new number of businesses. And what I see is that they create these rules and these systems and these managerial processes that prioritize numbers on paper rather than ethics. And oftentimes what I've seen is that those numbers on paper are focused on short-term gain rather than long-term gain. I think if you work as an ethical organization, the long-term yield potential is way, way higher than any short-term upside you can have by focusing exclusively on the numbers.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think that's why, that's a really good point. The key is the balance, right? Because you can't sacrifice short-term wins because then you don't have cash flow and your business fails. So you have to have short-term wins in order to keep money flowing and sustain your path towards that long-term victory, right? But you need to have that long-term victory in mind. And the systems that you erect and the culture that you create and the incentive structure that you have needs to be aligned towards that long-term victory. And these short-term wins need to be tangential to that, right? So that they move you in that direction. And this is something that the geospatial industry really struggles with. It is so easy to fall into the trap of building products for the government. It's so easy because the government, they spend a lot of money.
Really?
Oh yeah, they spend a ton of money.
I know.
And unfortunately, the problem for the government is the risk of misallocating funds is really low. Like there's very little accountability for misallocating funds. And so, mapping and understanding territory is an inherent government function. Like if you made a list of 10 essential government functions, and I would struggle to make that list, given my perspective on things, mapping and understanding the territory is absolutely on it. And so it makes sense that the government spends a ton on geospatial, but what that results in is a lot of really awesome technology going towards that government cash cow and neglecting or leaving behind the long tail of commercial and consumer users that could also benefit from the technology and could propel that technology towards something that's easier to productize and to monetize.
Okay. Before you go deeper, what is geospatial?
What is geospatial? Good point. So geospatial, I mean, it's a little bit of a dated term, but it's the term that we use to describe the industry of
heliospatial.
Heliospatial is a good one too. That is understanding where things are in the solar system. Geospatial is understanding where things are on Earth.
Right.
So everything exists somewhere. And for the most part, pretty much all value creation comes from taking something from one place where it exists, doing something to it, and moving it to another place where it's needed or wanted. And so in that value chain, place is a core component of it, whether it's data, goods, services, resources. Everything needs to move from someplace to another place to be put to work to benefit society, whether it's building houses or providing natural gas to heat homes, or building server farms so that you can have the minimum latency on your gaming experience, right? It all has to do with where things are. So geospatial is the science of understanding where things are and the relationship between them so that we can optimize how we bring value to people in the world.
What are some of the core use cases for geospatial data, or what does the industry typically think of? Because when I think of geospatial, I think of internet companies. I think of cable, like laying cable, right? I think of telecommunications, power lines. Then I think of satellites. I mean, and then mapping, like actually mapping infrastructure, roads, street signs, all that stuff. Is there other areas that are bigger in the space that I'm missing?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit a lot on the power players in the world of geospatial. I think telecommunications, they're building networks and understanding how and where those networks need to be in order to serve their customer base is incredibly important. And then to understand where each asset and component of the network is huge. So they run massive geospatial programs, utilities, and telecommunications do. But something I think everyone can relate to is the thing in your pocket. When you want to know where to go, you pick up your phone these days and you pull up Google Maps, probably, and you run a search for a restaurant. And then you pan around on the map and find the one that has 4.7 stars that's closest to you and meets your taste, whether it's Thai food or pizza, and you go to that one.
Yeah.
Right. And so maps have become so ubiquitous in our lives, we don't even think about them. But there's a whole industry behind making sure that when you open that phone, there's a good experience. And Google is a big big part of it, but it dates way before that, right? We've got
MapQuest.
the railroads. I'd even go further, like the railroads, right? Like, how do we understand what exists in the country and the landscape that exists there so that we can efficiently build this incredible infrastructure to connect east and west, right? So a lot of geospatial technology, modern geospatial technology came from the building of the railroads. But it's older than that. It's like military. It's like maps have been important to civilization from very early on, right? Yeah. And so modern geospatial technology combines a lot of the elements that you talked about. And a big part of the industry that I like to participate on is gathering data to build maps, right? So the geospatial value chain, as I see it, is things exist somewhere. We build sensors or we send people out to observe where they exist. These sensors might be strapped to cars. They might be on orbit on a satellite. They might be in airplanes. They might be in your pocket. They could capture images. They can capture point clouds to understand a 3D landscape. There's a host of different sensors and types of data that help us understand where things are and put them into context in relationship with each other. And then you gather that data together. You geocode it. So we've erected a system. There's multiple systems to understand where on the earth is this thing. Addresses. That's one way to do it. Coordinate, latitude and longitude is another way to do it. There's a lot of different ways to understand where on the earth this particular thing is. And then you put it into a database and you can run analysis to understand the relationship between things and where they are, so that you can make informed decisions and take action that help produce better outcomes for people. And so I think the easiest thing for people to grasp is the phone in your pocket, Google Maps, and a little bit more complex is like 3D point clouds that allow you to build 3D digital cities to model the way wind moves through an urban core so that you can set up your 5G towers and they don't get blown away and they optimally serve and the propagation of the waves happens effectively. Sorry, I'm getting kind of crazy here.
No, it's a lot. Honestly, I feel like I got a little bit lost. I feel like some listeners might have, unless they're geospatial nerds, which sounds like 0.00005% of the entire U.S. population. But it is interesting. What I do want to ask is, like, on the geospatial side of things, like, what are some fundamental concepts or some fundamental considerations that a successful geospatial data capturing organization should be thinking about?
Why? Right. And this is something that a lot of people...
Why gather data?
Yes, exactly. Why gather the data that way that you're gathering the data? And I think a lot of the industry is so caught up in how cool the technology is, because it's really cool. You can do a lot of really cool things with it. But when you're caught up in the allure of how sexy the satellite and the imagery that comes from the satellite is, right? You can forget about, well, who's actually going to use that data? And does the cost of acquiring and processing and delivering that data to the end user improve their experience and productivity beyond that cost?
I don't know. I'm thinking the first thing that's popping to mind is Disneyland or Disney World just started a light show instead of fireworks show. They're doing drones. Mm-hmm. That I would assume that's using a lot of geospatial data.
Yeah, probably.
Point cloud data to some extent, right? Like the drones need to know where they are in proximity to each other.
That's right.
They need to know where they are in proximity to the land. I'm like, that's crazy. The amount of technology and the amount of thought and effort put it behind that, and people love it. So, I think that's a cool.
Well, that's the why,
case.
Right?
Yeah.
People love it. But if you did that and people didn't like it as much as fireworks, and they stopped paying for that, they stopped going because I want to see fireworks. I don't want to see some stupid drone show, right? Then the cost benefit is not on the side of producing that technology, right? And so the value proposition of geospatial, as much as I'm bullish on it, is yet to be proven, if I'm being perfectly honest. And I think that that's something a lot of people in the industry would be hesitant to say. I mean, it's easy to point to the success of Google Maps, the
What about
success of Esri.
what about cityscaping? I mean, like Denver is a phenomenal example. If Denver had proper city planning, we wouldn't have a 3-lane highway running through the city that can't realistically be easily expanded. And with a population growth that we have coming into Denver, that highway is heavily taxed at this point. The traffic is unreal.
That's
And
right.
That seems like a really easy use case. Is like, are we properly city planning so that there's steady flow of traffic, people aren't getting crazy,
Yeah, that's a perfect use case. It's a really good use case, and that's why government is a really good customer for spatial technology, is because they have those kind of city planning problems,
Mhm.
right? Where do you zone? How do you track your urban development? How do you plan your smart city and make your city work better for your people? And my point isn't necessarily that geospatial analysis will not play a role. It absolutely will play a role. My point is, what level and degree of spatial technology will play a role, right? Because you have guys that can go out there and survey the land and understand it, or you can fly drones or aerial and collect LiDAR data. To LiDAR is you shoot lasers at the ground and you can understand the contours and you can develop a 3D model that's pretty close to survey grade accuracy. But it's really expensive to do that, right? And so does it make sense to fly the plane and have this model that you can repurpose? Or is it just as functional and cost effective to send guys out into the field and survey it, right? And so that trade-off is something that is still in the wash. I think a lot of, I think there are phenomenal use cases, especially when you're talking about like regional topography, where aerially collected data is far superior than people going out and holding survey stakes.
Yeah.
Right. It's impractical to do that. But on smaller scales, but the use cases for that and the people who are willing to pay for it aren't as large. Right. So the question is how can we reduce the cost of producing, processing, and making the data available so that it becomes an easy no-brainer? Absolutely. That technology solution, I'd way rather use that than what we're currently running with. And that spans industries, right? Is AI. And for a lot of workflows, it makes it more efficient. But for some workflows, it's not. It doesn't make sense, right? It's the errors, the error proneness, the way that you can lose your creativity and just fall into the stream of whatever ChatGPT is feeding you, and you lose your own cognitive processing, which could uncover the big step forward.
Dude, it's hilarious. I'm on a number of newsletters for, apparel brands and just e-commerce stores that I follow. And I refuse to open an email that I know was written by AI. And it's so because it's my job. I use AI daily. And so I know what's been written AI, and so many subject lines I just see in my inbox. I'm like, you didn't write that.
Yeah.
You didn't write that. Your brand used to be so unique and so authentic and so cool. And now you're trying to jump on the AI train because you're trying to become more efficient, maybe, or you think that AI is going to be smarter for you. I will tell you this for certain, that AI is not going to replace brand authenticity. That is the one thing that it absolutely cannot replace. I think it can improve productivity and systemization in processes that don't rely on the core values and core identity of who you are. But if you're trying to use it to replace who you are, you're just going to turn into a blob, just like every other business. Right. And what is going to set you apart from every other business? Absolutely nothing, because you and every other business are using the same factories in China to produce your clothes. So you're gonna fail.
That's right. And that's a huge challenge, right? Is how can you leverage technology to improve your process so that it's worth the cost, right?
I mean, the hard part is, TVs are one of the every year they become cheaper, right? There's some expression where a lot of technology it gets cheaper and cheaper. I mean, hard drives is a great example. You could buy a 2 terabyte hard drive, I think for like $60 right now. It's absolutely insane. 10 years ago, that was like a $400 hard drive. It's absolutely nuts. So I think the companies that adopt it now and create processes now, even though it's more expensive for them now, when they start replacing some of those components or some of that technology with the cheaper technology down the road, they're going to be way ahead of the competition who's coming into it late into the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that gets back to what we were talking about, iteration, right? Is if you can start weaving things into your process to understand and build that learning curve and iterate on failures and successes to produce more sustainable and reproducible success, that's the name of the game, right? Especially when you're operating at scale. Little things add up.
Yeah.
And they compound over time. Yeah.
Do we want to talk about marketing, sales, and operations at all?
If you want to, yeah. Sounds great.
So
it's like the core of every business. So
yeah, I mean, we got into geospatial, and I hope there's some geospatial people listening because that was pretty sweet, right?
And to be clear, I do think geospatial technology is pretty awesome and solves a lot of problems. But I'm looking forward to where the industry becomes accessible, not just to government and huge industry actors, but also, you know, your mom and pop excavator who needs to know where their equipment is.
Give me the solution, because you talked about the problem, you talked about the government, you talked about what it can be. What's the solution in your eyes?
Yeah, I think there's a convergence of technology, energy, and accessibility that needs to happen. Spatial technology is a very data intensive technology, requires massive computing power and bandwidth to receive real time feedback. So we either need to get to a point where you can process things on the edge. So like right where you're doing the work and gathering the data, or we need to get to a point where our algorithms are trained enough to deliver the information you need just in time, right? So that you don't have to deal with the whole package of data. You can deal with the small bits that you need at the moment. So the solution, I think, it comes down to the business case.
Simplify it. Give me something very simple.
Very simple. I had a conversation with someone today, and presented an idea, a solution. They're a startup satellite data company. Their platform, where they aggregate satellite data, and they also have relationships with satellite operators so that you could task a satellite. So the idea is that, or at least the use case that I'd like to talk about is, I'm a construction company, okay, and I want to understand the nature of my projects, where my equipment is, and have status updates on a regular basis that I can present to stakeholders and leadership without having to spend the resources of people driving out there and back and spending.
It should be automated.
It's automated.
Yeah,
exactly. And so what that requires in my mind is integrating that platform's capabilities with the tools that these folks are already using. So a lot of project management software are location enabled. So you can, when you receive a project, you put in the address. You can even go in and draw a box around the job site called a geofence, so that you know when equipment is coming in and out of that job site. And so
like NFT tags, what are you using for that?
Not NFT. It's just it's a digital bounding box. Just okay. You see a map and you just draw a little box on where you're working. And so it's like geo-enabled vector data. And so the integration would be taking this satellite platform and integrating it with this project management tool, which would require APIs on both sides, so that when that project manager draws that box around the job site, you automatically are prompted with, do you want regular satellite imagery updates on this project? Yes. What frequency? Every week or two within practicality, right? Maybe it's a 3-year project. You don't need weekly updates. Maybe it's a 3-month project. You want weekly updates, and you're willing to pay for it. And so then it's directly into the workflow.
Yeah.
Right. And now, instead of spending fuel and time to get out to this job site as a manager, I can see this project progressing. I have the machine hours that are happening in this project because I know this machine is in there, and that GPS data and the runtime is automatically integrated into my tool. Right. And so when you can start aggregating these data and these disparate data sets and putting it into workflows that work for that long tail of commercial and consumer use cases, instead of, providing batch data to large government actors who just go and sift through it or analyze it. I mean, there's value there too. That's where I think you start to unlock different types of innovation. You start to unlock different users, which means you unlock different feedback, which means you can have that to me is more of a product than a project, right? Because they're paying per image.
Yeah.
That you're generating revenue per image automatically. You don't have to sell to them. It's already integrated with the platform that has a network effect that does the sales for you.
Sure.
Right. So there's like just one solution that I was talking about earlier today. Sorry. Does that answer your question?
Kind of. Yeah.
Okay.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Bring geospatial data to smaller operations to improve efficiency and trackability so that they can be more productive and not have to helicopter their team.
Yeah, absolutely. And the only thing I change on the front end is make it easier to access it within their existing workflows. So right now you have to go to an application, you have to select each one. So you have to draw that bounding box twice, right? You have to make it easier to access it and work into the workflow so that it's second nature. It's a no-brainer. It's like, yes, this adds value. I don't have to fidget with a bunch of technology. It just works for me.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah, that's the name. That's the goal.
I mean,
right?
that's the hard thing about business though, is that there's so many good tools, but most of these tools were created separately.
Mm-hmm.
And integrating the tools, very hard to do. Love Zapier, whatever you want to call it. Phenomenal platform. It's one of the few out there that allows you to integrate tools that don't have direct integration without involving a developer, if there is an open API that you can use. And that still takes a team.
Yeah.
That still takes someone to figure out, because I guarantee you, if someone does develop the technology you're talking about, either they're going to be selling their massive bloated tool because they're incorporating all these other things that are not their strong suits into a tool for way more than what it's worth, or you're going to need to involve an expert to come in and tie these two tools together.
Yeah.
And I think that's huge. Something we talked about a little bit earlier this week that I think is just so prominent, I think about this pretty much daily now, is that if you're a problem solver and if you want to be good at business, marketing, entrepreneurship, productivity, really the biggest one, is the only thing you need to understand is if-then statements. If we want this person to be more efficient, then we need to make sure that their endpoint solution is fully integrated with our tech stack.
Yeah.
If we want cleaner data, we need to make sure that the data on the job site matches the data in the back office and that it communicates.
Yep.
Literally all you do is if then. Nested if-thens. Love it.
Yeah.
Love that concept. Anyways.
No, I think you're spot on. I think that's right.
I think a marketing, sales, and operations episode would probably be a full another episode at this point. So I kind of misled you guys on that first part.
But I do think we can touch on it a little bit.
I think we touched on it a little bit, but I do want to wrap up anything geospatial related.
Sure.
And this is a good segue, obviously, talking about project management, talking about if-then statements, that's a good segue into what does an effective operations look like for an organization. And then obviously I'm going to give my 2 cents on marketing because that's what I'm good at. Let's jump in. What do you got?
Why?
It's the 5th time you've done that.
I know, but it's so important. I think, you know, a lot of people work because they have to earn a living. But that's not the best work. That's not what's going to create a really good company. To create a really good company, people need to want to work there because of what you're doing, because of the impact that you're making, not just because of the paycheck that they're getting. And so that speaks to the why. And so when you're talking about a multifunctional organization, which any organization operating at scale is, whether it's finance, marketing, sales, operations, legal, whoever, they need to understand why. Why are we here? What is the purpose of this company? What's our North Star? What are the values that we need to analyze every decision that we make under in order to understand that we're making the right decision for the company to get us closer to that why? And so I think a lot of companies, especially with first-time founders, it's easy for the founders to get wrapped up in the thing that they're doing, right? And to delegate and leave functional silos to those directors or the leadership that's responsible for that. But a lot of times what will happen is those functions will then move in different directions, right? Because there isn't a clear why. There isn't a clear thing combining them. And so you can say, oh, we're building cool technology to save people's lives. Too broad. You need something more specific. We're building cool technology to reduce traffic accidents for bicyclists. Right? That's the why.
Yeah. And then it's easier to get around for sure.
Yeah. And people are like, oh, that's great. I love bicycling. I love seeing people bicycle. I love that it reduces emissions. Whatever it is, they can get behind that, right? And so you can rally your team behind why. And then beyond that, it's why.
What's your why?
What's my why?
Yeah. Of peace, love, freedom.
Peace, love, and freedom, man. Yeah. I mean, it's in the name. I think our relationship should be consensual, which is peace. That's peace. So voluntary exchange of value. And I want my family to live in a world where they can consentingly engage and participate in society and things aren't forced upon them.
Panopticon.
I don't know about that, but
yeah.
Love. I think people should love what they do and the outcomes that are produced. I think they should love their coworkers who they work with, and more importantly, they should love their family and communities. And I think when you have choice and consent in what you do and how your efforts and time are spent and the resources that you have access to, that you earn, like how they're used, you can more lovingly engage with the people around you, and you build better communities that way that actually care about each other. And that gives people freedom to think differently, freedom to engage in the world in the way that they want to, freedom to innovate and build things. And so my why is first and foremost my family. That's like the core. And because I love my family and I want to raise my kids so that they can do whatever they want to and be successful and happy and responsible and capable, I want to enable others to do that as well by bringing products and services to the market that help improve people's lives and solve problems and make things better, right? And so that's my why. And then there's values that surround that, through which I analyze decisions to say, hey, is this true to my values? Because my values are specific to ensure that each decision gets me closer to the why.
Yeah.
Right. And so after that, is there context, right? Does everyone understand where they fit into the bigger picture. Because if everyone knows the why and everyone knows the values, I might not know exactly what the developers are doing, but I know why they're doing it, right? And I know the product and the responsibilities that they have to serving our internal customers through their development work and our external customers. So I know why they're doing what they're doing. And from the development team to the customer success team knows, okay, I understand their outputs, and that's when they hand it off to me. Now I can do my job better because I know the reason behind their job and how they're doing it.
Yeah.
Right. And so that gets to the cross functionality of understanding the up and downstream functions of your business so that people not only know why they're working there to begin with, not just the salary, but what difference are they making, and how the other folks in the company are working towards making that difference and how they connect together so that feedback can move across your functions and throughout your business to ensure everyone's on the same page, moving in the same direction, and participating and cooperating and making something better, right? Because if everyone's kind of just doing their own thing, like, and you don't have a unifying why or values through which people analyze decisions or context, then your company's not going to grow as efficiently.
I also think something that's so unbelievably critical here is that the why needs to be legitimate. It cannot be a farce. And I see so many organizations that it's our mission to save the planet. No, it's not. It's our mission to help small businesses grow. No, it's not. Because if it was, you wouldn't be behaving the way that you're behaving.
That's right.
So if you have a why, you need to believe it, and you need to actually act behind the actual sentiment of what that why is.
Yeah. And that gets to the values. Right? And this is something that we talked about, and I'm sorry to bring in a previous conversation that happened off the podcast. But something I've been really thinking about is, if you ask people what's the point of business, some people, probably a large percentage of people would say making money. And don't get me wrong, a critical defining factor of business is making money. And it is necessary that a business makes money. But a business doesn't make money because the purpose of the business is to make money. And if it does, that business is sorry, it's fucked. Like, that's a messed up business. The purpose of a business, in my view, is to solve problems for people, to improve the state of affairs in the world, right? And when you solve problems that people find your problem solving to be valuable, they choose to reward you with money.
Yeah.
And so, like, money's great because it allows you to do the things that you want, but it's not the goal. It's a means to the goal, and it's a byproduct of solving problems. And if your business is in business just to make money and not to solve problems, that's a problem.
That's a blockbuster event is what that is. I do think the purpose of employment is to make money. Genuinely. Like, we can act like it's not, but it is. And yes, you can find fruitful employment. You can find employment that you literally love and enjoy and cherish. But the purpose of employment is to make money, because you can do all those things that you enjoy without making money and not have it be your job. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But business, I agree. The purpose of the business isn't to make money. The purpose of the business is to solve problems.
Yeah. I think I will recognize my privilege that because of my experiences in life and the privileges that I've had, I have the luxury of the opinion that you can do what you want and pursue your passions and be successful and advance yourself. And doing that means that you can do the things that matter to you, that you enjoy doing, right? Because I don't know, I'm sure some people love serving hamburgers to customers who are not very polite. I'm sure some people really like that. I mean, there are different people all around the world.
Yeah.
Someone likes that. But I don't know if most people like that. But that's a necessary function for those businesses to survive, is to have people to serve disgruntled customers who are not very polite, right? And so, but that doesn't mean that employee can't benefit from the why, can't get involved and participate in shaping and advancing the values of a company by coming up with ideas and in doing things better, right? And so I get your point. The purpose of employment, I don't know if the purpose of employment is making money. A lot of employees are employees because that's how they make money. But I think we're seeing a shift in the labor force. I don't know how it's going to turn out, because at the end of the day, things need to move from A to B in the physical world. And the laptop class does not do that, right? You have to dig the ditch. Someone has to empty the porta potties, right?
Robots
could do that, sure. I think we're a little ways from there, and I don't know if I like that future, but I think it is a future we're moving towards. So I guess the challenge is how do you engage people who are doing things that they don't necessarily want to do, and make it so that they're incentivized to do a better job at that, right? And money is a way to do that. I don't think hourly pay is effective at that. But I do think that millennials and Gen Z are to your point earlier, they're realizing why should I do that? Why should I go to college just to graduate and barely qualify for an entry-level job that's going to pay me $15 an hour when I can go like work at McDonald's as a manager and make $25?
Minimum wage is like 21 now in a lot of some states.
Yeah.
UPS drivers are making, I think, $100,000 a year now. It's crazy.
I mean, there's a lot of ways to make money. And so I think when people more and more people are waking up to the fact that, hey, there are a lot of ways to make money.
Yeah.
If my goal is just to make money and I just want to work a 9 to 5, that's their why. Hey, I just want to drive, and when I'm done driving, I just want to park the truck and I want to go home and spend the time with my family. That's fine.
I think this is the most important tenet of entrepreneurship, is that it's not for everyone.
No.
It is so glamorized, and it's like, dude, you don't need to own your own business. You don't need to take on all this responsibility. You can go out and you can get your bag without being an entrepreneur, and that's perfectly okay.
Yeah. I do think you should own your own businesses for tax purposes. I think it behooves people to do that and operate that way.
Perhaps.
Yeah. But they don't need to be entrepreneurial necessarily. I agree with you. It's not for everybody.
Yeah.
I think I don't know. It's interesting. I think the United States is a very interesting use case for human behavior and propensities, right? Because like we have an outsized number of entrepreneurs here. Why? Because entrepreneurialism is an inherently risky venture, right? You're breaking away from the security of a consistent paycheck and saying, hey, I'll make it on my own. And that's kind of the story of our nation. You know, like,
dude, I think it's geography.
Well, it's part of that, but it's also genetic. There was a lecture I took in law school on entrepreneurialism. It was in my venture capital class. And they were talking about how entrepreneurs tend to be hypomanic, which is a trait where you have excess risk tolerance. You tend to get frustrated with things really easily that you think should be easy. But you are very independent and analytical. And so I think that risk taking, and it tends to be inherited. It's not something that's just, sometimes it's random, of course. But I do think that coming to this place took it's a risk, right? From the very first immigrants that came here, it was a risk. Whether you want to think of the first immigrants as the people who crossed the Bering Strait or the people who came over on boats in the 15th century, like it's a risk. And everyone who's come here has shares. Well, maybe not everyone, because some people were brought here against their will. But a large portion of people who are in this country took the initiative and risk to come to this country.
Yeah.
Right. And whether it's from some of the most successful entrepreneurs are Ghanaian and Ethiopian immigrants who just come here and kill it, because they took that risk to come here. And I think, we're descendants of immigrants, and I think we have that risk tolerance. It's an interesting thing that most geographies don't have that degree of intentional immigration.
Yeah. Well, how long was the boat ride?
Pretty long.
I'm gonna hop on this boat. We don't know where we're going.
We don't know what's there.
Let's hope it works out for us,
Yeah. And it's wave after wave, right? It wasn't just let's leave Europe or Africa or South America or Asia to get here. It's let's move from the East Coast into the inhospitable, rugged West to try to make it.
Yeah.
Right. The ethos of our country isn't, it is the American dream, but it's this idea that the establishment is not good enough. The way people are doing things right now is not good enough. It's rooted in the past, and I can do it better. And so I will go out and do it better. And I think that's really cool.
That is cool. I actually like that a lot.
Yeah.
Sweet, man. I think we have a lot more to talk about. So I'm going to have you come back on. Sounds like in August potentially of this year. So we'll get into the marketing stuff, the operation stuff, the sales piece a little bit more, how it all interconnects. But for now, I hope you guys enjoyed that episode. We talked about geospatial, talked about how to hire, right culture,
How to hire. Yeah, I can dig into that big time. I think hiring is like one of the riskiest and most important things that you can do as an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Hire.
Sweet. All right, bro. Well, good having you.
Thanks
for coming on the pod.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
All right, guys. If you like this, like and subscribe. Tell your friends. Tell your family. Tell your coworkers. Share it with your boss. Be the boss. Live the dream. All right.
Peace.